The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're actually expecting quite a lot of people. We're just under 80. So I'm just going to give it a minute just to let everyone join. I see there's quite a few people that are coming through. So if you don't mind bearing with me for a minute, I'll then start. Thank you. Morning again, everyone, and thank you. I see most of us have joined, which is great. And as I said, this is a fantastic session. It definitely seems to be that employee development and succession planning are definitely hot topics. And that's in essence what we're going to be discussing over the next hour. So I've jam-packed quite a lot. Sharing some of the system execution. But in today, what I'd like us to cover is just functionality. So, what should you expect from career development? What should you expect from succession planning? And in today's webinar, I'm actually going to extend it a little bit further to give you a few tips in how we should do career path and give you a few tips in how we should do succession planning. And how we can't actually look at it in isolation. It is impacted by different processes that we do. And then to show you how we can execute that strategy using a system. We will also do the usual metrics, so what you can expect should you have a system that can automate these processes, what you can expect these systems to give you, how you can do the ROI, which is a little bit tricky on this one, but we'll try and unpack it. The typical project timelines, pricing models that you can expect. What do these systems sort of typically cost? And then should we have time, we will end off with questions. If we don't have time, because I do see that I've got to go through quite a lot, I've left you with all my details at the end. Please feel free to just touch base with me, or even if you think of a question tomorrow or in future, please I'm quite happy to respond on email or via phone. And just answer these questions, because it definitely seems to be something that we are all very aware of, and many of us are finding it quite difficult to tackle. So with that in mind, let's begin. Just so that you know, just some housekeeping rules. I always do forget this. This session is recorded. I will be sending everyone a copy of the session. You are all muted, but please feel free if you've got any questions to put it down there in the navigation pane of the webinar. And as I said, I will try and answer those questions as we go along, or worse, I will answer them at the end or privately after the session is finished. So just in terms of systems functionality, so we're talking about career development, which the reason we talk about it is because we believe that that's where employee engagement and retention starts, and we talk about succession planning. So from a system perspective, we actually see those as dual processes. They're not one of the same. So we have, on the one hand, career pathing, which we believe is the ownership of the employees and a discussion between the employee and manager. And a typical process that would follow is you would recruit someone into the position, you would provide them with a training plan so that they can ramp up. That may include various projects, getting them up to date, working with their peers, potentially some mentoring and coaching. We evaluate their performance and how they're doing. We give them tips and potentially training on how they can do better. And then the next step for them logically is a promotion. And then once again, in the new job role, we have the training plan, project assignment, and so it carries on. And it can be very much of a cyclical process. The other half is what we call succession planning. And this is more for us in HR, and it's the responsibilities of the executives to identify exactly what it is that we are experiencing. And for this one, it's sort of a five-step process, which I'll take you through later on, where we've got to identify the roles, identify what are the key positions, and make sure that we've got the information required in those positions. We have to assess potential, which is always the tricky part, because is it leadership potential? Is it learning potential? What potential are we talking about? We need to put in review workshops. So once we've got 5 or 6 nominations as a review, as peers, we need to evaluate the skills, the competencies, the gaps of that person to that position. And then from there, select who the suitable successor is. And then once we've got the suitable successors, that's when we need to create a tracking and a monitoring process where we actually create development plans, and we create goals, and we make sure that it's in alignment with executives. And that is a very high level as to how we approach succession planning. And through my research, I've realized that many of us are in fact doing it this way. We may be doing it manually, we may only be doing it for certain key positions, but definitely our thought process is there. What seems to be tricky is we don't really do the career planning part with the employee. So sometimes when we're doing succession planning, there is a misalignment. And that's why we encourage, let's do the career planning. So let's focus on the career planning side for now and see what it is that we need to do. Let me just see if my screen will, there we go. So from career planning, what is the purpose? The purpose of this is it's an internal course that's driven, and this is very important, it's driven by the employee. You know, it's for them to understand what their knowledge is, what their skills are, what their personal characteristics, and what their experience is, and what it is that they require. So they almost need to tell us what it is that they are wanting to do within the organization. And then it's their responsibility to make a plan to obtain what is necessary. So once again, the onus is on the employee for them to say, I'm wanting to do there. What do I need to do in order to get there? So a career plan, typically what we say is it's very strongly, and it's a critical factor in performance development planning, or your PDP, in which the manager and the employee are discussing development plan opportunities for the employee. So it's not just what do you need to do to be better at your current job, but what do you need to do in order to get to the next level, get to the next step of where you're wanting to be. And it's very important that this is in writing. Um, you know, I was working with a previous company who instilled this within their employees, and they, before they had a system, actually started these. They called them career conversations, and the conversations themselves went fantastically well. But because they didn't put it in writing, because they didn't have a plan to execute it, it kind of just fell dead. And what happened is that they had all of this traction and it just died. And the employees started getting a little bit more demotivated because they're saying you said all the right things, but nothing actually took place. So now they've started with the system. They're doing the career conversations again, and they're actually saying, here you go. This is after our discussion. You said you wanted to do this. These are the steps you need to take in place. Let's work on the development plan. And just having it in writing has made it real, has made it realistic, and there's a commitment. There's actually an end goal to when I'm going to achieve certain things. And the performance appraisal is actually a really good tool to use in making sure that the person is on the right career path, because the manager should know where the employee is wanting to go, because that transparency, that conversation should be happening. So if I know that you're wanting to move up or gain additional skills, I can actually ask as a personal development item in your performance appraisal, how far are you? What do you need to do? And remember that a career path plan needs to encompass that ultimate goal, where the individual wants to be right at the end point, what steps and what jobs they need to do in order to get to that ultimate goal, what experience they need, how long each step. For example, certain senior positions, I have to be in there for at least 3 years in order to gain the competencies, and what development each step is going to bring. So it's the idea of, if I can see the road ahead, I'm going to remain engaged. I'm going to remain focused here. So developing a career path is where we need to focus on at the moment. And as I said, this is a lot of responsibility is now between the employee and the manager. So it's simple. It's defining the ultimate goal. Understanding expectations is very, very important. It's often the reason why companies are quite reluctant to embark on this journey of creating a career path and giving that transparency to the employee, because they all want to be CEOs. And then when the CEO leaves, they all think that they can take it. So it's very important that when you understand the expectations, you explain to them that certain job roles are a lateral move, certain departments are department transfers, certain are job promotions, and explain to them how the recruiting process actually works internally, and that we will look internal for 7 days first and then open it external. If you are the right person for the job, if you have the skills and competency, experience, and the qualification we need, then we will invite you for an interview. But just because you have it on your career path does not mean that we're automatically going to take you in. If you just explain and they understand those expectations, it's amazing the respect that you will actually get. And the whole idea of the career path for the individual is that need to enhance, continuously grow the skills, competencies, and their experience. So just because, for example, you are now a sales consultant doesn't mean that's all you're going to do. You continuously need to find out, how can I add extra responsibilities because I want to go into a management role? What does a manager need? Okay, fine, they need extra competencies, these computer packages. Let me put my hand up and say, please, can I do this? If they don't know what that management role requires, it's difficult for them to say, but can I go on those things? And that's where the transparency and the trust comes in. So the additional considerations that you need to take into account is, from an employee's perspective, they have to decide on their career goals and where they want to be in the organization. We often ask them in the interview, why do you join this company and where you want to be? And they will say, well, it's in line with my career growth, which is A, B, C, and I want to be X, Y, Z. Start that off immediately. Because once I've got them, if this company that we work for can enrich their career, can provide their ultimate goal, you have retention right there. They need to put their career path plan in writing so that it is real, it is tangible, and it can be tracked. And employees have to own their career path plan. They can't sit back anymore and say, well, I'm waiting for a suitable job to come up. Because if you're just doing your current job and you want a promotion, what are you doing to get there? And it's also this new millennial generation coming in is also pushing this ownership, because that's how they function. That's exactly how they're wanting to work. For us in HR, what is our responsibility? How can we support this whole process? One of the things that we need to do is we need to make things a lot more transparent. People get a little bit nervous. Um, But transparency, with transparency comes trust, with trust comes respect, with respect comes loyalty, and with loyalty comes engagement. You can't hold back on certain things. You can't hold back on what you expect certain management roles to have and still want your employees to be engaged. It has to start right at the bottom with transparency. And it is the key to employee engagement. It is the key to employee retention. So when I'm talking about transparency, what do I mean? I mean, we need to be transparent in all our job descriptions. Job specifications. What do you expect the individuals to achieve? What are the required competencies per level, per job? What are the skills? What is your internal job application process? What training classes do you have available? And hopefully you have a catalog of training that you do have available that they can put up. What are the opportunities for on-the-job development? Is there coaching? Is there mentoring? Is there job shadowing? Is there peer reviews? What do you offer me? Because then if I know that, I can put my career path together and I can work closely with the managers. So just to sum up that part of process, career planning, career pathing, career development, career ladders, whatever jargon we put it to, what it means is the internal growth of the employee working closely with the manager, and HR provides the tools that they need in order to get there, i.e. we provide the transparency. But the onus is actually on the employee. We just support them. Where we come in is from a succession planning perspective. So we know succession planning, it increases the availability of your experienced and your capable employees that are prepared to assume certain roles as these roles become available. In short, it entails developing the internal people with the potential to fill key leadership positions or any key critical positions in the company. So questions that we need to consider is, for example, if I go back there, what percentage of our employees will retire in the next 5 years or the next 10 years? What percentage of your employees are looking for other employment? And what are you doing about it? As that picture shows, many of us, and you're not alone if this is the case, many management, many HR, many executives, many businesses, their approach is just to put their head in the sand and to pray everything sorts itself out, to pray that our salaries are aligned, that's what keeps them going, to pray that the market is so bad people don't want to look for jobs. And this is probably where we were sitting quite a few years ago. But now with the whole globalization of the market, now with this whole new trend, the millennials coming in, we actually cannot take this approach anymore. And that is why succession planning has become such a talking point, so key at the moment, because we have to create those career lines. We have to make sure that our key positions are being taken care of. We've identified who our key people are, and we're doing initiatives to retain them within the business. So we're being proactive. And that's what management is asking from us in an HR's perspective. So if we just sort of look at some trends impacting the marketplace, we know that 72% of companies predict leadership vacancies in the next 5 years. We know that there's shifting workforce dynamics, demographics. Baby boomers are transitioning out of the workforce. Your millennials are coming in. There's another generation starting to come in already, which means with this whole shift, we're having knowledge loss, we're having gaps. We also know that there's this continued right sizing or downsizing or reorganization of companies. Because the market is changing and the industry is changing, we ourselves internally within the organization are changing. We're changing how we do the jobs. We're changing what is expected from the jobs. I mean, if you had to ask yourself how many times you've edited a job role in the last 5 years, it's going to be quite a few times. We also find that 44% of the workers between the age of 45 and 59, they say they will retire before 65. And 10% of the workers between the age of 50 and 59, they will retire, but then 2 years later, they'll actually come out of retirement and they'll move into a part-time job. So we're also getting some of the skill set back. But when that skill set comes back, we're probably paying a lot more for it than we had them as a permanent. So with all these shifts, with all these changes and the costs of recruiting being so high, we do have to now look at putting a proper succession planning strategy in place. So I thought before I sort of show you a system that can help you execute it, let me just help you in guiding what typically we do when it comes to succession planning. And for me, it's a 5-step process, with HR being that key change agent. You know, our role in HR is to find people who fit culture, internal or external, and then help develop those skills to be able to reach the goals of the business. You know, it's our responsibility to develop a succession plan that links talent with strategic goals, and be able to have an eye toward who is ready to take on these key roles, whether it's today, 3 years, or 5 years' time. And we need to make sure that people have enough exposure. Once again, it's that transparency coming through to know where they want to be in the future and what they need to do to get there. So the first step for me is the assessment of key positions. What are our key positions within organizations? And be careful not to just look at the senior positions. We need to actually drill it down into the entire organization, because maybe your organization is a call center and you are very reliant on actually someone in that call center who's got that particular knowledge. We've got to keep our eyes open. Once you know what your key positions are, identify your key talent. Who, from a skills, competency, gap perspective, can fulfill that? Once you've got your forum or your talent pool of people, you then need to assess them to find out how far off are they from meeting that goal. Are they within the next 6 months, whether they're within the next year, maybe 2 years? And then generate that development plan. So development is not just looking at performance and making sure that you're doing your job properly. It's also making sure that I'm growing you within the organization with different milestones. And then make sure, this is the one we sometimes do forget, to actually develop the monitoring and the review process of that. It is very, very important that we're able to actually develop. And that's where the personal development plan comes place, and continuously talk to them. So if we unpack these just slightly, the first one is the assessment of key positions. So as I mentioned, what are your critical positions? And then if you have tagged them as your critical positions, do they have to have a succession plan? Or are you comfortable that this role, you can find a lot of skills externally, it's more junior, so therefore you'll just have a recruitment process, maybe have a talent pool sitting on recruitment. What are the skills level? What's the education level? What is the experiences that you need to qualify for each key position? And also look at the behavioral competencies, specifically if it's a more senior management type role. You know, so much we will promote a sales rep into a sales manager, and we lose a fantastic sales rep and we gain a terrible manager. It's important for us to actually specify what are the behavioral competencies required, what are the leadership competencies, because that could be in the development plan. So you might have all the skills and competencies, but behaviorally you need to go on a certain plan that needs to go through. So once we finish with step 1, we can go to step 2, where we can identify the key talent. So you need to know who is on your radar. So managers have probably spoken to you in the corridor, or the CEO has mentioned, or even the CFO has mentioned, hey, this person's really got the right attitude, they're pulling their weight. Make sure that you're looking after them. Also know who's the retention risk. You know, I've spoken about this in my previous webinars where I said just because the person is doing fantastically well in their current job does not mean that they're loyal. You need to understand how their cultural fit in, how they're participating with their team. Are they good team players? Is this someone that you really want to keep in the organization? And you have to look at the history in order to understand the retention risk, because one of the things that CEOs are nervous of is that you spend so much time and energy developing a person for a key role and then they leave halfway through. So it's important, once again, our eyes are wide open, that we know that if there is a risk, that it's a mitigating risk, that we can cope with it, or potentially the risk is too great. We also need to identify who has leadership potential. So the sales rep might be doing so-so, but man, they're going to be a fantastic manager. It's also important to look at that. Know who your critical employees are. Make sure that they're on a career path. Some people are experts in place. They are absolutely fantastic. Some of them are coders or developers, and they're absolutely brilliant. And you just keep on giving them those extra projects, that extra, so that their career themselves can grow, but they don't really want to move up the ladder of success. And then generally we find that this is identified by the management's assessment of performance and potential for advancement. So your performance evaluations are important. 360s, man, they come in so handy, because if I'm responsible for doing an extra project, for example, or something new that you've given me as a task just to keep me motivated and encouraged, what better way to do a 360 evaluation of everyone that was involved in that project so that I can get feedback. Have I done well? Have I not done well? And if I have done well, let it add to my profile. So when you're doing that gap analysis between how far off I am from my ultimate goal, that gap is being bridged because I'm taking on extra responsibilities, and those responsibilities are actually being assessed. And then step 3 is the actual true assessment of key talent. And this is where it becomes a little bit more difficult, could become costly. Some people think that the way they need to assess the talent is to be able to use psychometrics. With us, what we do is we understand what is the primary development need for the next level, and what are the skills and competencies required per job, and what are the skills and competencies that the current employee has. And then we can do a gap analysis between the two. And the way to keep those updated is through training, it's through performance evaluations. And that's how we really understand what the true score is of the individual skills and competencies. Also, it's important that you do need to assess everyone's potential. There are a few tools out there that if you're keen, I can share them with you. One or two of my close friends are actually psychologists, and they themselves have actually developed certain tools to just assess the potential, and they tailor make it per industry so that it's relevant to you. But as I say, this could become quite costly. But with that, we need to identify who is ready for promotion now, within the next 3 years, within the next 5 years, and actually share those results with the employees, because we know they're on a career path anyway, and say, hey, listen, this is the gap that we've experienced. If you're wanting to get there, this is what you're going to have to develop on. And if they are truly engaged, if they are truly believing in the culture, they will take this with both hands and they will run with it. It's a way for us constantly to be open and honest with one another. And as mentioned here, it will help the employees to identify their career goals and aspirations. Sometimes the manager sees something in the employee that the employee themselves doesn't see in themselves. Whether it's right, whether it's wrong, whether it's positive or negative, they do need to be highlighted. And the fourth step is the development plans. So this is where you create almost like a roadmap for your key positions, and all of them have development plans. And you can help guide the employee if they themselves say, well, I don't know what I want. You can help guide them create a career path. So now you can see how the dual process is working. So we've got a succession plan for a sales manager. We've identified Kathryn as particularly being good in a sales manager role. So we've created a development plan for her. At the same time, Kathryn has identified she'd like to be in a sales management role. So she's created that as her ultimate goal on career pathing. She's taking ownership of how she's going to grow in there, and we're taking ownership in making sure that she is growing in the right direction, so that ultimately, should a sales manager role come up, hopefully at that point she has got the skills, competencies, and qualifications she requires. We're both working from opposite sides towards the same middle goal: retention and engagement. And it's also important that we actually sort of create almost like a development toolbox to provide job enrichment, because sometimes we might have to be static. Let's be honest. Promotions don't come all the time and people don't necessarily leave, but we don't want to lose the employee. So certain things that we can do is potentially look at creating those special programs or projects. So Kathryn, you're a senior salesperson. The sales management role might only come open in 5 years' time, or we're only going to grow in 5 years' time. But hey, here's a different program for you. You're learning, your career is growing, you just don't have the title yet. Committees, get them involved in different areas, task force assignments, do some job rotation, even mentorship, work closely with that next level that this person is wanting to move with. As I said, that 360 feedback is invaluable. Let them go on seminars, conferences, continuously improving their education, hopefully their qualifications. And what's vital is that problem resolution opportunities. So this is where, for example, we are allowing them now to solve problems on a different level, to come up with ideas, to come up with initiatives on how to solve something that is actually not on their level, but is on a level above them, because then they can be exposed to how that thinking, how the analysis actually takes place. And once again, they are learning and they're gaining that understanding internally within the organization. Very, very key, very important. And once again, because we are incorporating all the in staff and we managing the communication effectively, it means now we should be in a position to definitely increase the engagement of our staff. And then the last one is the development of the monitoring and the review of these plans that we've got linked to succession. So ideally, same as performance, have an annual or best a biannual, almost a status check-in, where HR and management sit down and we say, this is what's going on, and you feed that back to employees. The reason you do this is because you actually want to ensure alignment with the goals and with the vision. Maybe this is not a critical role anymore. The business has changed tack. We're bringing in a completely different product line or a new division. And it's important for us that we then realign and we change succession plans. Those that are in place, we need to evaluate the progress, update those development plans if needed, shift out the goals, change the milestones. Maybe the person has already achieved it. And that ongoing feedback and status check with employees helps to confirm the engagement. The same thing that happens in performance, where you've got to have continuous feedback, the same thing happens with succession planning and career pathing. It also happens. We can actually do them in exactly the same conversation, or you can separate the conversation. But what needs to happen is you need to have a conversation with me as the employer on how well I'm doing in my current job and how far off am I. What am I doing in my personal capacity to reach certain rewards? And what are you doing as a business to help me reach those rewards? Be that training that you provided, being it saying, yes, I can go to a seminar, but it is always that two-way street that actually comes through. So before I take you into the metrics and things like that, I just want to give you a high-level overview in terms of what a system looks like. I must admit, I was a bit, with all my research that I've done, because obviously I'm more a fan, I'm just going to put this up here, I'm a fan with the Deltek talent management system. I did find, and it'll be interesting to find out from the group if you found this as well, but there are very few systems that actually sell career development and succession planning almost as a standalone module. It's either part of something, or in many cases, like your human capital management systems or your typical HRIS type systems, it's not even included. And I think that's why we've almost been crippled. We need to execute this. You need to, as I said, put things in writing, but there's not that many tools available for us. So we've always gone back onto Excel. And if you're a small company of 50 or 60, that should be fine. But how do you do career pathing in Excel? How do you keep that conversation going? How do you keep it visible all the time? It does limit us to a certain extent. So I'm quite chuffed actually that ours has got career development succession planning, and it is a separate module. It can stand on its own. But in saying that, it's not really something that we recommend, because career development, for example, relies so heavily on performance feedback. It relies heavily on being able to access learning. So it is, and I understand why some systems don't sell it as standalone. It's reliant on a whole lot of different initiatives that we take place. It's quite strange how management want us to do succession planning, career development, but not interested in performance and the way we do recruitment. It's almost, this is the summary. This is the conclusion of what you can get should we do performance and learning and recruitment correctly. So this that I'm showing you now is the Deltek system. Once again, for those that have joined us in the previous webinars, you'd understand that there's the dashboard. So every user that logs in can have a glance view of actually what's happening. And they can see the 9 box, which is very important. So we can assess where my team is. We can quickly see those employees that have active career paths. So all of mine, I'm 100% active career path, so I know that's fantastic. I've got all my staff is engaged. So far, it looks as if I'm good. I'm able to see the development plan progress of various plans, and I can obviously see the competency fit. So it's very easy for me as a manager now to be able to actually keep in touch with what's happening with my employees without having to do too much analysis. One of the things that I raised earlier is for us to support, for example, career pathing for an employee, we have to be transparent. So I want to just show you a job profile that we've got in the system and how exactly it is constructed and the information that it requires in order for this really to become effective. So I'm just going to go to my job profile and I'm going to edit one that I've got here. So let me edit the associate financial analyst so I can show you. So the important thing is, besides all the information at the top here where it's typical with everything, what's important here is the system's going to say, well, does this have an organizational impact? If I had to say yes here, what I'm saying is this is a key role. This is critical. And the moment I say yes, the system is immediately going to put it in a list that says, now you need a succession plan. So every role that I identify as critical, the system's going to say, well, where's the succession plan? Also, we'll talk about minimum job in duration, and this is important to manage those expectations of the employee. So, for example, if I am going on a junior position, rule of thumb, it's 6 months that I need to be in that role in order to be proficient and gain the skills and competencies. Middle management is 24 months. And then we find your senior management is 36 months, sometimes 72 months. So it's just important to be able to manage the expectations of the employee to say, well, this is rotation, this is that, but hey, we expect you to be in this role for at least 3 years in order to gain all the necessary qualifications. Then the standard, this is your job description, your job requirements, that's typical. But then with the job role, it also comes here where we're able to say, okay, fine, well, what is the training that's actually required? So in order to be proficient in this job, you need to have these qualifications or you need to have completed these internal courses. What are the skills required? What are the competencies that required? So if I had to open that up, for example, I can see there's these skills. I can see the skill level. I can see how long I need to have had that skill for and when last I needed to use it for. And competencies can be now on an actual rating. So when I'm doing a gap analysis, I'm actually comparing myself, my level of trust, compared to what the company requires in this particular job. And that's what we're talking about, that whole level of transparency. So when it comes now to an individual, so if I go now and I'm going to open up my menu, and I'm going to go to the Career Center. So this is almost like that employee self-service. One of the components I have here is a career development where I can come and I can now search for careers. I can say, well, I'm wanting a particular job or I'm wanting a job that has a skill level with accounts payable, all of these components attached to it, search. Or this particular competency. And then all those positions that there's my associate financial analyst, the one that we just looked at, all those positions now come up and I can see the competencies that are required for that job. I can see the job skills required. But we always like to see things sometimes in a more graphical format. So what we will offer the employee is the ability for them to run their own gap analysis, which compares all of their skills to the job and all the competencies. Or typically they can actually just pull up a radar graph, which will then just compare their skill set compared to what the job requires. And right now, the job requires it on these 4 levels. They don't have anything. There's nothing red on this graph. So they're very far off. They're about 72 months far off. And it will do the same with the skills. So they have no competencies and they have no skills. So I can decide, oh, this might be too far off. Maybe I must go and check another one. But the idea here is that I've got the ability now to search for those careers. If I wanted to, and if we had a full spectrum with a learning management system in place as well, I could actually then come through here and I could now search for courses to say, well, I want to bridge this gap. What do I need to do in order to bridge that particular gap? From a manager's perspective, we also give them the flexibility and the complete transparency that they can view their staff and they can view the development of their staff. So right now I've got Stephen Best. I can see that he's on a career path of being a director. He's also on an HR manager career path because sometimes it's difficult to isolate where you want to be exactly. But we generally say you follow one at a time. And if he wants to look at the detail and actually see well, what's involved in this career path? How's this individual doing it? I'm able to actually see the detail, and I'm able to see where the jobs are. Just excuse it's a demo site, so it doesn't really make the English is not that great, but it will show me the potential, how many months in position I need to be. And once again, against every level, I can drop a gap analysis to understand, is this person meeting the development requirements? And that tracking and that monitoring of the development milestones is easily done now by looking at the development plans. And I can actually see the details, and I can see what are the items that you need to do, what was the target date, and what was the completion. And once again, the employee has access to this. The employee is updating whether they've done something, whether they haven't done it. It's easier one-on-one, and the manager can keep tabs on it. We in HR also got the ability to be able to pick up how far you're off on it. And when we're looking at succession planning, we can actually isolate, is this on your career plan? From a succession planning perspective, this is where we, together with the executives, really play a huge role in the system. So if we've gone into that job profile and we said it's a key position, the system will now put it into this list, and it will say, here are all the jobs that require a succession plan for. So I've got business development manager and I've information technology manager. It's got a list of the number of successes, and then it's also got a list of the number in the talent pool. So if I had to go here to regional sales manager as an example, I can see that I've got one successor. I could ask the managers to nominate, which is standard. I could ask the heads of department to nominate, but I myself, who's responsible for the succession plan, can come through here and can say, well, who currently has got this particular skill or has got linked to this manager, or maybe is on a low to moderate potential, or has this competency, or has this education, or held this previous job? Search. And it will then go through all of the employees that you have that meet your criteria, and it will list them right here. So here again, I've got Stephen Best. We just viewed him earlier. Guess what? I can pull up the gap analysis again. I can see how far, if I had to click on that, I could say, well, how far is Stephen? Let me make this a bit bigger so we can see that. How far is Stephen from regional sales manager? So we will graphically display it, and we will numerically display it. So we require accountability and innovation and excellence on a level 3. Stephen's already got it on a level 5. From a skills perspective, he's got all the requirements that he needs. So you know what? He's actually pretty good top dog. I'm now actually going to add him to that talent pool. I'm going to add him to that list. So when it comes here, all those people that have been nominated to me or that I have selected have now been displayed. And there's Stephen Best that we've done. And this is where the talent forum comes into play. And the talent forum says, right, let's now look at these 5 individuals. We can compare them to the current incumbent that is there. If we had to click on Stephen, we would get to see all the information that is linked to Stephen, from what we've done with him from a talent perspective. So we can see his job history, both internal and external. We can see, is this on his career path? Maybe not, so we need to consider that. We can even understand what his risk of loss is. How involved is he? His risk of loss is low. So that whole retention risk, the system is calculating it for us. And if we were happy with Stephen, we would simply come and say, well, Stephen, I'm happy with. So what I'm wanting to do is I'm actually now going to go through to his role, and I'm going to add him as a successor. So we'll go back to Stephen. He's still in my talent pool. We've decided we're going to add him, and I actually then add him to this particular plan. We can put notes down, or we don't have to. And he's taken off my hot list. And if I view the potential successes now, there, he's been added with Magda as a key. And what I can now do is I can actually manage his development plan for this particular position. So hopefully he's on a career path wanting to go up. And at the same time, Kevin is on the career path. Stephen and us have decided that he's a key successor, and we work with the succession plan. So you see all of that we've put into place. All the system does is it executes it. It just makes that information a little bit more accessible and handy. So hopefully that gives you a bit more understanding into what you can expect from a system that focuses on succession planning and career development. And what I want to do now is just go back. I'm just going to move this out here and just give you high-level understanding, I'm just watching the time as well. I know we've sort of running out of time here, but give you an idea in terms of what metrics you can expect from a system that focuses on succession planning and career development. So simply, it will give you metrics into the career planning, where you can see potential distribution. You'll be able to see employees without a career path. You can even pick up the average performance rating by length of service that they're with you. And you'll be able to pull a gap analysis for all your employees. So now you'll be able to actually create that skill matrix. That is very important for us, and it almost actually forms the basis of the strategies that we put in place. And we'll be able to do a gap analysis for the jobs. What are the skills that we require in the jobs? What are the skills that we have in the organization? You'll be able to see where the gap is, and maybe that talks back to recruitment to say, well, we do not have this skill set. We do not have enough of this skill set. We don't have enough mentors in the company to actually develop it internally. Let's hire someone with that skill set to start increasing the knowledge internally. From a succession planning perspective, one of the metrics that you can do here is you'll be able to see what training was required for this individual to actually become a successor, and what was accomplished. You can look at your key positions. You can look at the people in the key positions. You can look at successions that don't have successors. Look at the completion of the courses. And then with all of this together, you're now able to concretely, I don't even think that's a word, but to factually go to the business and say, this is our turnover. This is why our turnover is like it is. We can break it down between manager turnover trends, job title turnover trends, by company, by job title, by the entire company, and say this is the trends that we are facing. When this change happened and we didn't communicate, we had a dip. But now you'll be able to have a system that, just using its basic metrics, will be able to actually give you a clear understanding as to what's happening. And metrics are good, but management is always on our case in terms of just wanting that return on investment. And sadly, there isn't this perfect formula to measure talent management. And this is the calculation that you use. And I've got a calculator, but for us, the talent management wasn't just looking at succession planning and career development. It looked at what we spend in recruitment. It looked at the performance, the work that we put into performance. It looked at learning. It looked at all the different factors. And I did a lot of research over the last few weeks in preparation for this webinar to see, is there this perfect calculator that we can use? And all of them seem to be guiding to the same way of, to measure talent management, you have to measure all the initiatives that you are putting in place. So what I thought of doing is just giving you a basic formula that I did work with in the past, where it actually looks at career development. And one of the things that we do know from an ROI perspective, and all the research points this way, is that should we do talent management and we do succession planning and well, it obviously will lower the recruitment costs because we can now promote internally. It reduces the management time because now we can clearly define what the skills and competencies are. We can isolate who the successors are. So the number of meetings that we need to have can be reduced. It goes to reason that it improves the results of the individual. The employee's performance goes up. Why? Because they're motivated, because I'm putting effort into them. Because they're motivated, higher revenue. Less financial risk because we now are armed with the information to not necessarily just develop people and then lose them at the end. We're actually now making more calculated guesses. That sounds bad. We will have increased or decreased employee turnover, improved company performance, and a lot of these systems are web-based, so we can now have reduced IT hardware and support costs. So not only will our strategy be in place, but because we have a tool that will execute that strategy, we're really sitting quite nicely. So let's look at measuring ROI. This is what I looked like a few weeks ago when I thought, how am I going to get this ROI measured? And then I went back to my basics and I came up with a formula that I used many moons ago that worked just to identify what the career development cost would be for us. So the first thing that we did is, let's work on the same that we've worked for the previous webinars, where we've got a company of 430 staff and they've got an average turnover of 5 to 10%. So this is generally the norm in most South African companies. And I thought, okay, fine, for this calculation, I always like to be conservative. I'm just going to say this company has a 5% turnover, which means within the year, we're going to move and rotate 22 staff. So employee turnover, as discussed, employee turnover is where we actually look at the termination cost. We look at the cost to recruit someone else. We look at the vacancy cost. So that would be the actual cost where there's no one in there. So between the time that the person left and the next person started, there might have been a gap. And we also then look at the learning curve cost. So how long did it take to ramp up this person? So based upon the previous calculation that we've done in the webinar, we're looking at about 108,000 Rand is what it would cost us per person to actually lose someone. But you can't just look at that. What we've also got to look at is the revenue per employee. So not only is it going to cost me, but what did this person actually bring in? And the easiest way there is to look at the revenue and divide that by the number of employees. So let's say this company brings in 30 million, 430. So from a profit perspective, they brought in just under 70,000 Rand profit. And the cost then for us, if we add all of that together and we times it by the months, is about 2.37 million for the employee turnover plus the profit, which is 1.4. That then gives us that if we are in a 5% turnover, it would cost this business of only 430 employees 3.8 million. But once again, I like to be conservative. So let's say it's not that bad. And we just take, say, 60% of that. So we say it would cost us 2.2 million. If we do succession planning correctly, we should increase or reduce, let's say that, we should reduce our turnover by as much as 60%, between 40 and 60%. So if we reduce succession planning by 40%, so we take that 2.2 that it's costing us for a 5% turnover, and we work out what 40% of that is, we should be saving 915,000 Rand just by doing succession planning correctly. Point of interest for you is a system would only cost you 94,000 Rand a year. So not only will you be saving 915, but you'll be saving less than 100K on a system that can help you execute it and possibly reduce it more than 40% and actually go to the 60% mark. And as I said, succession planning, it is a difficult thing to be able to iron out. But I'm going to come back to this because there's more to it than just looking at succession planning that I want to leave with you as food for thought. So in terms of project timelines to implement a system like this, generally, I would say it probably takes about 6 weeks. But we find that there's a lot of process discussions that take place. There's a lot of what happens if this one, who must be the plan owner, who must do that. And that's why the system could possibly take up to 3 months to actually implement. So if you've got a strategy in place and you've got all your information, you could get it up and running quite quickly and quite easily with 6 weeks. But if you don't and you're needing the system to guide you on how you want to do certain things, then you sort of need to look at a 3-month period from the moment you've decided to launch this project. And then pricing. So I looked and I looked and I looked for modules that were just career development and succession planning. And the only one I could find in the South African market was the Deltec Talent cloud-based one, which is pay per employee. So if you're 500 employees, then it will be a license for 500. I couldn't find any other way of pricing. So if anyone has got some ideas, it's always good for me to keep up to date with that, but I did not see the research that was showing that to me at all. And then as food for thought, just to bring this all together, I just wanted to ask the question is, do we believe that talent management systems are worth it? So we have an HR information system. It's keeping all the records into place. Why now talent management? Isn't that just an extra system? Isn't that just a fad? Do I have to have a talent management system and an HR information system? What's an HR management system? And for us, talent management systems focus on compensation, recruitment, performance, learning, career development, succession planning. It doesn't really do payroll. It doesn't have any of your compliance reporting. Some of them do, but that's its key focus. So let's take what we've learned over the last few weeks and let's put it all together. So one of the things is we can automate recruitment. And if we look at the number of hires, the cost per hire, agencies, the recruited time spent, and we put that into sort of a formula, and we look at the cost of the software, we've worked out that immediately you would have almost a 72% saving. So we plug that into our table. So we'll spend almost $500,000 on recruitment a year. The software will cost us 151. So we should be saving 381,000, because remember, the software can't eradicate potentially, placement fees and job boards. There are still going to be some costs, but it will definitely reduce on your admin costs that are taking place, and it will allow you to advertise on social media at no cost. Then we look at the second aspect, which is performance. And when we went through performance, we looked at the employee turnover, and we looked at how a system could increase HR's productivity. So we no longer have to work with these queries. We worked out that we sometimes deal with 12 requests per month. So taking all of that into account, and this is a scary figure, we could spend almost 1.6 million rand worth in performance. And it's not necessarily development that takes place. This is just our time in dealing with queries. Performance is key. It's one of the main things that we do. Software will cost us about 156 a year. So we could, just in time alone and efficiency, save up to 1.4 million. That in itself is crucial. And I think that's why a lot of people are now starting to invest in performance management systems, because they've realized that there's a massive gap between what they're spending and what they could be saving. Then we looked at learning. And learning, we looked at, if you do the old traditional way of learning, of outsourcing training to various providers, versus bringing it in-house and developing your own e-learning material. So this was just based on one course where 5 people went on training for 5 days. And yes, we would still spend money on developing the content, but ultimately just one course could save us quite a lot of money. So when we looked at it, the annual spend was 300,000, software cost was 156, and there was a saving that was there. Then we just look recently at what we've done with development, which is this calculation that we've done here, where we've worked out that we could spend, once again, it's the same as performance. We could spend close on 2.2 on development. Why? Because that is taking into account that if we don't do development, we could actually risk losing the employees. That's the turnover that we're looking. Software, we know, costs 94K. So our annual saving, should we reduce the turnover by 40%, which would be 915,000. So now we ask the question, is talent management systems, in light of this information, worth it? And if you total it up, to me, just looking at the figures, you show this to a CFO, it pretty much becomes that the annual cost of a system implementation and the ROI works out to be 45%. Where else have you ever got an ROI of 45%? And this is looking at conservative figures. And yes, these figures will change from one industry to the next. You might not have such a high staff turnover. You might not do performance, but ultimately, the ROI on doing these initiatives correctly and doing them in such a way that we become streamlined, you start getting a very high return on investment. So I've noticed that we actually show there are a lot of questions that have come through. I'm so sorry we have run out of time, but I'm going to answer those questions one-on-one. After the session, I will email you. I've got all your email details. I think just in closing this HR in the Cloud webinar series, the last thing we're going to focus on is the data. So it's all fine and well to know that we're going to be having an ROI of 45% and that we can automate our processes. But when it comes down to it, these systems need data to drive it. And each system requires data in a different format. And especially when we're starting to look at talent management as a whole, what must the job profile look like? It's easy to say when I'm just doing performance, I need my KPIs and my goals, and recruitment, I just need a job description. But now, what does talent management actually need, and how do we start? And there's a lot of free resources that are available on the internet that I will share with you next week, where you can actually start building your own job profiles. You don't have to outsource it to these companies where they'll charge you an absolute arm and a leg. And then we've had to get involved again and realize it's not compatible with talent management. It's way too difficult. It looks fantastic, but it actually doesn't have any effect whatsoever. So please join me if you are serious about looking at talent management, looking at either investing in a system, or you have invested in a system and you're just wanting guidance on how to put the content together. Please join me next week. It's going to be our last one, and I'll make sure that we end it on a high note. And as mentioned, if there are any questions, please, if there's something that you ask after the time, or just some advice that you're wanting, I don't mind, please email me at kathryn@silversoft.co.za. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm often looking at articles of how to better improve things, and I will post them on LinkedIn. Just a way for us to actually create a forum where we can share the knowledge, because ultimately we are all in the same situation. We are all looking at succession planning. We are all understanding career pathing is important, and I believe we can definitely learn from one another. So from my side, thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to chatting to you all again on the 12th of April. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.